people write letters, how they email, how they text, how they each whatever you could have the same message, but how it's conveyed in each of those mediums is different. And so we've had to spend a lot of time understanding that language of how we talk about things.
Yeah, yeah.
You know,
Well, and sometimes it's very subtle. I know there was some research that came out recently at the University of Vermont that looked at Instagram and how people facing a mental health issue or who are depressed, like there's a certain filter,
Sure.
there's a certain
the
tonality.
Applied Mathematics group did some
Yeah,
really
it's-
interesting work with
It's
that.
very interesting because some of the stuff is super subtle and it's not, you say signal. I think that's a really good phrase or term for it because you don't necessarily, it's not just like a word that would be very obvious to you or a photo that would be very obvious to you. It can be very simple choices that the person might not even be conscious of, but as you're watching and listening, you can pick up on these things and they might grow over time, they might not, it might be a low level, but still.
And the challenge we run into in many cases, we our technology is sophisticated, so but still, the philosophical perspective is, well, what if we serve up information to a school superintendent, let's say, of something that they then act on, and it gets someone in trouble who shouldn't have, like, that signal is misinterpreted or isn't, and so we've been very aware of that part of the conversation. I mean, I do national media interviews regularly, and I get asked in every one of them about privacy and just what we do and how important to us your privacy is. And so trying to provide a value, save a life, provide information which can get someone help, walking the line between doing it for all the right reasons and not serving up so much information that, it creates perspectives that may not be accurate, and of course then relying on the schools to be smart enough to understand. If you're a school principal or a university vice president or such, the assumption is you've been in the business long enough to be able to make good decisions with whatever information is coming at you, not necessarily making assumptions about it. And so those conversations are important because, as I learned yesterday in one discussion I had, someone had said, well, this interviewer had said, well, talk about the privacy, and we talked about when on a surveillance tool, we don't do any of that. And I made an interesting point, which I don't think I'd made prior to that, which is your cell phone, your smart thermostat, your Amazon Alexa device, or whatever you have, knows more about you than we ever will because we don't gather information. So we're trying to do what we're doing, and there's a lot of, well, let's make sure you're not looking over our shoulders. At the same time, I think this morning on the way in, there was there are 14 billion IoT devices and Internet of Things devices in use right now in the world, and it's going to double or triple in the next 12 or 18 months or something to that effect, 28, 30 billion. The amount of data that companies know about us is significant. And so it's interesting to then walk that line of, we're here to help you help save a life, and there's a privacy concern, but you're more at risk of having your privacy be breached with the phone in your pocket than you are with what we're doing. And yet, these are important conversations. Like, we have to have them because of the ubiquitousness of social media.
Well, and that's I think you bring up a good point. Like, I think one of the biggest questions of today's society is big data and how it's used.